I knew something was wrong the second I heard the scream. Not the terrified kind, worse. It was a scream twisted with shock, guilt, and undeniable pain. My daughter Mia's voice, cracking in a way that turned my blood to ice. I dropped the grocery bags right there in the hallway, oranges rolling toward the baseboards, and sprinted upstairs. Mia! I shouted, taking the steps 2 at a time. The house felt wrong, too still, as if it were waiting to exhale. The bathroom door was shut. The light leaked out from the crack at the bottom. Dad, don't come in. Mia cried. But it was too late. That voice, my baby's voice, did something to my mind, something primitive and desperate. I shoved the door open. And I froze. Mia sat on the cold tile floor, her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach. Next to her, crumpled on the ground like a discarded sheet, lay a pregnancy test. The result window was still wet. 2 pink lines. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her cheeks. Dad, I'm pregnant. Shock yanked the breath from my lungs. What? How? Who? The questions tangled and strangled each other. Mia, who is the father? Her lips trembled, opening and closing like she was searching for a version of the truth that would hurt less. Before she could speak, a voice I hadn't heard behind that door cleared their throat. I hadn't even noticed someone else was in the room. From behind the shower curtain stepped a man. Shirt rumpled. Hair messy. Eyes guilty. My wife's lover. Ellen. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. That moment, those seconds, felt like someone tearing open my chest with bare hands. My heart didn't just drop. It slammed into the pit of my stomach and kept falling. Alan didn't speak. Didn't apologize. Didn't run. He just stood there, shoulders tense, jaw clenched, as if preparing himself for the punch he damn well knew he deserved. My daughter sobbed harder. Dad, please don't freak out. But my voice wasn't even there. It was somewhere above us, clinging to the ceiling. Finally, I managed, Mia, why was he here? Why is he? I didn't know, she cried. I didn't know he was. Moms, I didn't know until today. I swear, Dad, I swear. Her face looked so young, so broken, that something in me cracked alongside her. Alan stepped forward, hands raised slightly. If you let me explain. Shut up. He stopped. I didn't shout. The words came out disturbingly calm. The calm of someone seconds before a catastrophe. That's when I heard the front door slam downstairs. Then hurried footsteps. Then her voice. Michael. My wife, Claire. The air thickened, heavy with everything unspoken, everything rotten. She appeared in the bathroom doorway, breathless, hair disheveled, keys dangling from her fingers. She took one look at Alan. One look at the pregnancy test. One look at Mia's face buried in her hands. And her expression turned ghost pale. Michael, she whispered. Please, don't jump to conclusions. It was such a stupid thing to say that I actually laughed. Not a normal laugh. One of those sick, disbelieving huffs that escapes because reality has finally snapped in half. Then help me out, I said. What conclusions should I jump to? Because from where I'm standing, the man you've been sleeping with got my daughter pregnant. Mia cried harder, shaking her head violently. Dad, please. It wasn't like that. I didn't know. He didn't know either. That hit me like someone driving a stake through my ribs. Clarity didn't come gradually. It slammed into me. He didn't know either. And suddenly, I understood. The betrayal wasn't simple. Nothing ever is. This wasn't some twisted revenge plot. This wasn't intentional sick betrayal. It was stupidity. It was secrecy. It was a web of lies that had stretched so thin it finally tore, leaving everyone bleeding on the floor. Mia crawled toward me, crawling like the little girl who used to run to me after nightmares, except this nightmare was real and I couldn't wake her up from it. I didn't know, she whispered. He told me he was single. He told me he lived alone. I met him before I even knew you hired him at the company, before I knew anything. My head throbbed. I turned to Alan. Say something. Anything. I didn't know she was your daughter, he said, voice shaking. She uses your ex-wife's last name at school. Michael, I swear on my life, I didn't know. He looked terrified. Good. You still slept with my wife, I said. He flinched. That was a mistake. Funny, because it looks like you made it twice. Claire stepped between us. Michael, please, you're focusing on the wrong things right now. Oh? Please enlighten me, I said. What should I focus on? Your affair? His relationship with my daughter? The fact that I just found out all of this in one goddamn bathroom. Her voice cracked. Mia is pregnant. She needs us. That word, us, felt like poison. Mia sobbed, curling into herself. I can't do this. I can't. Some instinct took over. Father instinct. I knelt beside her, wrapping my arms around her. She buried her face in my chest and cried like she hadn't since she was 6 years old. Whatever else was happening, she was still my daughter. Still my baby. Still the person in this room who mattered most to me. We'll get through this, I whispered against her hair, even though I had no idea if it was true. I'm right here. But as I held her, I stared at Claire. And then at Alan. Two people who had broken something sacred. Two people who stood there, helpless, waiting for the explosion. It wasn't going to come. Not yet. Shock acts like anesthesia. The pain comes later. When Mia finally pulled away, red-eyed and trembling, I asked quietly, do you want to go to your room? She nodded. Come on, I said softly. I walked her out of the bathroom, my hand on her back, guiding her. Claire took a step toward us, but I stopped her with a look so cold she froze. Mia, Claire whispered, sweetheart. I don't want to talk to you right now, Mia said without turning back. Those words gutted Claire more than anything I could have said. I got Mia settled in her bed, dimmed the lights, and handed her a glass of water. She curled up under the blankets, hugging her pillow, eyes hollow with fear. Can you stay? She whispered. Of course. I sat at the edge of the bed and took her hand. Her grip was weak but desperate. Dad, she whispered. Yeah. Are you mad at me? My heart nearly broke. Mad? No. Never. Confused? Shocked? Scared? Yes. But not mad at you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I know. I didn't even know who he was until today. Her voice wavered. I wouldn't have. Dad, I wouldn't have if I knew. I brushed a tear off her cheek. I believe you. She let out a shaky breath, relief loosening her shoulders. She closed her eyes, exhausted. But before she drifted off, she whispered words that chilled me to my core. Dad. Alan said Mom told him to hide their relationship from me. My heart stopped. What? She nodded weakly. He told me she said it would. Complicate things. Complicate things. I sat there long after Mia fell asleep, staring at the wall, feeling something inside me shift into something darker, heavier. Complicate things. I left her room quietly, closing the door behind me. Downstairs, Claire and Alan sat at the kitchen table like two criminals awaiting sentencing. Claire rose. Michael, please, let's talk calmly. I didn't sit. Didn't move closer. I just stared. Did you tell him to hide your relationship? I asked. Claire hesitated. That was enough. Yes, she finally said. But, Michael, it wasn't what you think. The chair across from her screeched loudly as I pulled it back and sat down slowly, deliberately, like a man preparing to inventory every piece of the wreckage left behind. Then explain, I whispered. She swallowed hard. I didn't want Mia to feel uncomfortable. It was all new, and I was going to tell you eventually, but eventually, everything was always eventually with her. My voice stayed low, steady, but vibrating with something I could barely contain. Claire, why did you hide it from me? Because I knew you'd react like this. Like what? I snapped, losing the last thread of calm. Like a man whose life just detonated in his bathroom. Her eyes filled with tears. I never meant for this to happen. But it did. Alan looked between us helplessly. Michael, she's right about one thing. I didn't know Mia was your daughter. If I had known. You wouldn't have screwed her, I said, my voice a razor. Congratulations on the bare minimum of decency. He shut his mouth. Claire wiped her tears. Michael, the reason I came home early today is because Alan called me. He told me he needed to tell me something serious. He told me Mia was involved. I didn't know it was this. I swear I didn't. So you didn't know she was pregnant? I said. I didn't. Her voice cracked. But Alan said Mia thought she might be. And I panicked. I had to get home. The pieces were rearranging themselves in my mind, forming the beginning of a picture so ugly I almost couldn't look at it. You came home to get ahead of the confession, I said. Claire recoiled like I'd slapped her. No, Michael, that's not. You wanted to control the narrative. She covered her face with her hands. I leaned back slowly, heart pounding. Then Claire whispered, barely audible. I never wanted this. But now I need your help. I blinked. My help? She lifted her head, eyes swollen. For Mia, she said. For the baby. Alan nodded solemnly. We want to do the right thing. That phrase, do the right thing, sent a shiver down my spine. Claire continued, we want to take responsibility. But we need support. Financially. Emotionally. Michael, we're asking you to help us sponsor the baby. To support Mia. To support all of us. I stared at them. At the woman who betrayed me. At the man who impregnated my daughter. At the people now asking for my help. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not loudly. Silently. Like a bone snapping under skin. Because that was when I realized. This story wasn't done destroying me. Not even close. I laughed then. Soft, humorless. The kind of sound that slipped out of a chest full of glass. Sponsor them, I repeated. You want me to bankroll the fallout of your choices? To be the safety net for two people whose decisions wrecked my daughter's life. Claire's hands trembled. It's not just us asking, Michael. Mia, she's scared. She needs stability. The clinic bills, prenatal care, school. School. I said. She's still in school. Yes. Claire's voice was small. We want to keep it that way. She shouldn't have to drop out. Mia was upstairs, asleep on a bed that smelled faintly of lavender and shampoo. Small domestic details that made the betrayal taste worse. I pictured her trying to navigate pregnancy in a high school corridor, the whispered cruel midwives of adolescence. My chest went cold. You think money erases what happened? I asked. You think a check wipes away a year of lies? No, Claire's eyes were red, fierce. But it helps. Please, Michael. For Mia. For the baby. She said for the baby as if the word could bend time and wipe out the past. As if the unborn child, innocent and undeserving, held the moral high ground in a mess its parents made. I looked at Alan. He avoided my gaze, hands clenched into fists under the table. There was shame carved into his face. Raw, ugly, human. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for absolution of the practical kind. I thought of my father, stern, practical, a man who would tell you what to do and then check the accounts. He would have muttered something about responsibility, about duty. He would have sat down with a ledger and mapped out what help looked like. He would not have let emotion make rules. And then I thought of Mia's hollow eyes when she asked, "Are you mad at me?" And I felt something like a thin, cold flame licking at my ribs. "We'll talk money," I said finally, voice flat. "But not now. Not like this." Claire exhaled, relief nearly visible. "We need a plan," I said. "Names. Dates. What kind of help? No theatrics." Alan nodded. "I can pay for." "We'll discuss payments," I interrupted. "Not promises. And I want transparency. No more hiding. No more lies. Anything you get, any appointment, any call, you tell me. Full disclosure." Claire stared at me like I'd offered something impossible. Full disclosure, I repeated. "You promised to hide the relationship from Mia. You lied to protect yourself. From now on, the only thing that will protect you is honesty." Mia had been asleep for hours. The house had shrunk into shadows. Somewhere a radiator clicked like a metronome, counting off the slow, steady time toward an uncertain future. Claire moved closer, reaching for my hand. I didn't take it. She retracted, fingers hovering like a supplicant. "Will you at least consider it?" she begged. "We can talk specifics tomorrow. Let me come up with a plan." I wanted to tell her to leave. I wanted to drag her to the center of the room and make her show me, piece by piece, how her life intersected with Alan's and how those intersections had collided with mine. I wanted to know, to feel, the lie in the marrow of her bones. Instead I said, "I'll think about it." She left the room with Alan in tow, shoulders hunched, the two of them like guilty adolescents fleeing a scene. The front door closed behind them with a sound like the final click of a trap. I stayed alone at the kitchen table, the moonlight painting silver bars across the counter. I let the silence gather and listened to it. There was a ledger in the basement, an old accountant's notebook my father had kept. I hadn't touched it in years, not since he died, and the habit of accounting fell into my own hands like a mantle I didn't always want to wear. But now, somehow, I needed numbers. I needed lists. I needed the reality of columns and sums to steady me against the dizzying, fevered fog of betrayal. I went downstairs and found the leather-bound book, its spine cracked like a smile. The pages smelled of dust and mothballs and a life measured in receipts. I opened it and ran my finger along ink that had once mapped mortgages and grocery budgets, the small decisions that kept a family upright. I imagined those pen strokes had once been my father's voice, practical, stern, unromantic. I set the ledger on the kitchen table and began to write. Prenatal care, clinic visits, nutrition, lost schooling, counseling, time off work, childcare. Each line was a sentence in a story nobody had asked me to edit but which, suddenly, I was expected to fund. I didn't have to sign anything tonight. I didn't have to forgive anyone. But I wrote numbers anyway, old habits turning into a scaffold of facts. A car door closed outside, the neighbors returning late, the usual hum of lives continuing. The normalcy of it stabbed at me. How were they all moving on? How did they know? As if betrayal were a private weather system that touched only our street. I slept badly, the ledger tucked under my arm like a talisman. In the morning, Mia told me she didn't want to go to school today. She wanted quiet. We sat on the couch and watched the snow melt across the lawn in gray slush, and she traced patterns in the condensation on the window. "Dad," she said finally. Did Mom know Alan was involved with me? I mean, did she know about us?" Her question was clumsy, a hand probing for reasons in a dark room. I could have lied to soothe. But I'd sworn to myself that night, full disclosure, and so I told her what Claire had told me, that Claire had asked Alan to hide the relationship. I left the ugly part out, the bargaining and the plea for sponsorship. For now, Mia absorbed it like a small animal stunned by light. "Why would she do that?" she whispered. "Why would she tell him to hide it?" I wanted to shelter her, to shield her from the calculus of motives. But the truth, like an arrow, already had a name: fear. Claire's fear of judgment. Fear of losing what she'd built. Fear of the collapse of the fragile architecture of our family. She panicked, I said. She thought it would cause trouble. Mia's jaw tightened. "She never told me." "She thought she was protecting you," I said. In a way, she was protecting herself too. The day stretched like an unspooling film. Alan called mid-afternoon to set an appointment at the clinic. Claire sent a text, short, clipped, asking to meet. I agreed, because men like me, practical, ledger-laden, knew that words meant little compared to plans. We met at a coffee shop, a neutral place where steam fogged the windows and strangers murmured like distant surf. Alan arrived first, hands in his pockets, his face pale. Claire came after him, cheeks hollow, eyes desperate. They flinched when I sat down. I let them. Then I laid the ledger between us like a treaty. "You asked for help," I said. "Here's how we start." I listed numbers, estimates for medical appointments, counseling, a contribution to Mia's education fund, a stipend for childcare post-baby. I spoke in the language I knew best. Dollars, deadlines, responsibilities. My voice was calm. The calm had teeth. At each figure they winced, but they nodded. Alan reached for the notebook and wrote down a pledge, to contribute what he could, to be present, to submit to a paternity test when the baby arrived. Claire, whose hands had been tremulous since this had begun, wrote too, promises that read like stitches on a wound. They both signed, in shaky ink. It meant little or everything. Paper was paper, but it was also witness. "Thank you," Claire said, voice thin. I felt nothing. Or perhaps I felt everything at once. The metallic tug of loss, the slow, unpleasant calculus of responsibility, the sour taste of being needed by people who had broken me. That night, after they left, I walked back through the house. I passed Mia's room and paused at the doorway, watching her breathe in the dim light. She looked so young, the tilt of her cheek so clean, the fine hair at her temple catching the moonlight. I thought of the way life rearranges itself without asking. The suddenness of a child in a womb, a family in motion, the small steps that become giant distances. I thought about Claire saying we need your help and about the ledger, about signatures and promises. I thought about the way people sought to fix themselves with other people's resources. And then I found something that made me drop the ledger back into my hands like hot coals. It was a photo on the kitchen counter. One of those casual images people leave to justify their own memories. A picture of me and Claire from 3 years ago, smiling at a friend's wedding. It had a sticky note on the back with a scribble in Claire's handwriting. Alan, start August 2019. Keep off social, need discretion. My hands went numb. I read it again. Need discretion. Not hide from Mia. Not protect the family. Discretion. It was precise. Deliberate. I flipped through the drawer and pulled out an old planner, one I'd forgotten was hers, and found several entries in that same handwriting. Meetings, dinners, phrases like discuss kids, late night, other life. The words were small betrayals arranged in a neat, obedient list. It wasn't a single, panicked decision anymore. It was a pattern. My chest closed over the ledger like a fist. That night I slept even less. The next morning I sat at the table and watched Claire make coffee, her movements automatic, muscles practiced. She smiled at me in the way spouses do when they want to appear unbroken. I found the note, I said quietly. She froze. The kettle hissed. What note? The one about discretion. The planner. The dates. She set the cup down with careful hands. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she said, "You weren't supposed to find that." "I wasn't supposed to find a pregnancy test in my daughter's bathroom either," I replied. Claire's face collapsed into something I couldn't name. Shame, perhaps, fear, the slow erosion of excuses. "I thought I could manage it," she murmured. I thought if I compartmentalized, nobody would get hurt. "And yet here we are," I said. "Mia is hurt. I'm hurt. You asked me to sponsor them." She looked at me then, something like pleading in her eyes. "I know I betrayed you. I know I made choices. But Mia, she's your daughter. She needs security. Please." My ledger lay open between us, the numbers staring back like truth. I thought of signing, of closing ranks for my family. I thought of what betrayal does. It doesn't ask permission before it changes the map of a life. I picked up a pen. My hand hovered over the paper. And then, as if the house itself held its breath, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "We need to talk. He's not who he says he is." My pen froze. Claire's eyes widened. Alan, who had been standing at the sink, looked over like a man hearing his own name in a confession. There was a silence, thick and dangerous. "What is it?" Claire whispered. I turned the phone so they could read it. She read and her face drained of color. Alan's jaw tightened. "We need to talk," I said slowly. "Looks like our ledger might need footnotes." Everything shifted. The neat columns of responsibility blurred into shadows that suggested something deeper. Another layer of deception, perhaps, or a secret that folded back on itself like an accordion. The meeting that was supposed to be about schedules and payments had just become dangerous in a way I had not expected. And in my chest, something older than ledger and law stirred. An animal sense that this story was far from over. The message on my phone was a small black stone that made the whole world slip. We need to talk. He's not who he says he is. I remembered the exact way the light fell through the kitchen window, the thin late afternoon sun making dust look like galaxies. I remembered the sound of Claire's breath, the way Alan's jaw moved as if chewing on something bitter. I remembered my hand tightening around the pen until the knuckle went white. Who sent that? Claire asked, voice barely a thread. Unknown number, I said. It called an hour ago. No voicemail. Just the text. Alan's face went paper blank. For the first time since I'd opened that bathroom door, I saw raw fear. Not the tired guilt of a lover caught but the cold panic of a man whose story was cracking. Who? I pressed. He swallowed. I don't know. He sounded small in a way I'd never heard. Maybe an ex-someone from before. Or someone who knows your pattern, I said. The ledger lay between us like a judge. Pattern implies repetition. Names, dates, discretion. That sounds like a practiced behavior. Alan swallowed again. His shoulders sagged as if some invisible weight had been dropped on them. He started, then stopped. The words hung, useless. Claire stood abruptly. The chair scraped. We can call whoever sent it. We can. No, I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. We don't call. We find out. I was a man who had spent my life parsing ledgers, parsing habits, parsing the honest and dishonest ways people spent their hearts and money. Now that skill was a weapon. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly in the empty room, and left them there, two guilty people at a kitchen table, while I walked out into the weak sun to breathe. Outside, the air tasted like the end of summer and the promise of rain. The world felt cruelly, indignantly ordinary. Children on the sidewalk kicked a soccer ball. A neighbor clipped his hedges. Life, indifferent to the disintegration inside my house, went on. I drove to the office. Work is a kind of order I know how to wield when the personal world becomes chaos. I had access to things, HR files, background checks, employee logs. I told myself I was being practical. I told myself I needed facts because feelings were treacherous. Inside Alan's personnel file I found small, neat lies. An alias. A certificate from a college that didn't exist. A name that matched 1,000 other names but not the one he'd given. The man on paper was a ghost, and ghosts have habits. They leave traces, and those traces repeat. He'd been with us 18 months. In that time, he'd been charming, punctual, useful. He'd called in favors with a smile. He'd known just the right thing to say to Claire when she looked worn and to Mia when she wanted to be seen. It wasn't difficult. The truth was, for a man who makes his living on illusion, it's the small things, praise, attention, the uncanny timing of a text, that do most of the damage. I printed everything. Names. Old addresses. A picture dug up from an online archive. Alan at 27 in a bar with different hair, different name, same smile. The smile didn't change because smiles are universal and practice perfects them. When I walked back in, Claire was pale as paper and Alan had his hands in his pockets like a man trying to stop them from shaking. Found something? Claire asked. Enough, I said. I laid the pages on the table. The papers fanned like the wings of a trapped bird. Their faces shifted, fear, then anger, then the collapsing curl of shame. It's not what it looks like, Claire said quickly, the words rehearsed, like a line from a play she'd practiced in a mirror until it fit. He kept some things from me. I thought, she broke off. You thought what? I asked. The ledger's ink seemed suddenly cruelly crisp in the light. I thought he was different when he came here, she whispered. When we met, I thought he was an honest man. I thought. You thought you could keep it contained, I finished for her. That's what you tell yourself when you lie by omission. She flinched. There was no defense to that sentence. All the small evasions we perform to survive, omissions, half-truths, little permissions we give ourselves, stack like a tower of cards until a breeze topples everything. Alan's voice was small. Alan, he's been in trouble before. I told Claire. I said I'd changed. And did you change? I asked, not looking at him. I was looking at the signature, his neat, practice scribble under the employee onboarding forms. I thought of Mia's face on the bathroom floor. When did you change the truth into convenience? He opened his mouth, closed it. He looked like a man who once believed he could rewrite the world by editing out the parts that didn't suit him. Claire's eyes were wet, but not from sorrow only. There was something else, an anger, a fierce, self-preserving flame. We were sloppy, she said. We kept secrets because we were selfish. But we are not criminals. Not yet, I said. But you've put a child in a position she shouldn't be in. You both did. Mia's face, sudden, raw, pulled at me. I remembered lying with her that morning while snow water trailed down the window, the way she asked, "Are you mad at me?" and how I had said no. Now I had to keep that promise and also be a wrecking ball. I called Mia down. She came, hair in a messy bun, eyes red but resolute. She sat across from us like someone facing a jury. "Do you want to keep the baby?" I asked. It was the bluntest question I could think of. Brutal, true, necessary. She looked at Claire first, searching, and then at Alan. Her voice was small but steady. "I don't know," she said. "I'm scared. I'm scared of being alone with it. I don't know what it will be like." "Then we give you choices," I said. "We give you space, support, and we will help you decide. No pressure. No shame. Only truth." She nodded, tears threatening, and then looked at Alan. "Did you lie to me?" she asked. He looked at her and something broke in him. "Yes," he whispered. "I lied about the past. I lied about being single. I lied because I wanted. I am a coward. I used people and then I thought I could stop before it hurt. I was wrong." Mia listened like she was collecting pieces to assess whether the net beneath her was strong enough to catch a fall. At that moment, Claire did something that stunned me. She stood and walked to Alan and put a hand on his cheek. Not a touch of tenderness but a touch of terrible, aching responsibility. "You made me an accomplice," she said quietly. "I thought I was protecting my family. I thought I was protecting you both." Her eyes fell on Mia. "I never wanted to put you in harm's way, Mia. I thought I could fix it. I was wrong." Her apology was not heroic. It was small and human and full of the kind of regret that does not absolve but asks to be noticed. We talked until the starless hours. We made calls, to a lawyer for Claire, the kind of person who could protect a family's reputation, to a counselor for Mia, to a clinic for an appointment. I arranged for a paternity test when the time came. I scheduled counseling sessions for Claire, mandatory if she wanted any access to deciding the baby's future. I called my sister to be there for Mia if things became too heavy. The ledger grew new entries, therapy, legal consults, educational support, and I read them aloud like incantations to keep us anchored. Somewhere between the arguments and the logistics, something subtle shifted. The fury didn't leave me. It nested like a thorn that pricked at every tender place. But the fury was now channeled. It moved toward action. People always want to know how the betrayed react. Do they explode, or do they crumble? The truth is, sometimes they do neither. They build. With trembling hands I wrote a check for the clinic deposit, not as an absolution but as a line drawn in the sand. I would protect my child. I would not be the instrument of their continued deception. Weeks passed in a blur that tasted like antiseptic and coffee. The paternity test came back. The baby was Alan's. The result hit like a physical blow and also like a relief. The unknown had a name. Alan, stripped of ambiguity, was a man responsible for a life. Alan disappeared shortly after. Not arrested, he left town with a bag, with the practiced ease of someone who always had an exit strategy. He called once. Mia did not pick up. He sent a message asking forgiveness and saying he hoped she found peace. He did not come back to ask for help or to stand the course. He was gone like smoke. Claire stayed. She moved out of our bedroom and into a small apartment nearby, close enough to be involved, far enough to feel the consequences of what she'd done. She attended counseling once, twice, then less. People heal in unreadable patterns. Sometimes the work is public and visible, sometimes private and shrouded. Mia kept the baby. I helped. I wrote checks. I signed papers authorizing care. I sat in waiting rooms. I cut up carrots and made soup at 3 in the morning when the world felt too large for a fragile girl who was becoming a mother. I went to prenatal appointments and listened when the doctor's voice dropped into the throbbing hush of something that knew more than our astonished hearts. We argued. We fought, about custody, about who would live where, about therapy and the shape of a future I had not chosen. Every fight was a thin, raw thing, and at night I'd lie awake and count the cost. My marriage, my trust, my tidy life. Then in the morning I'd go downstairs and coax a smile out of Mia when it seemed impossible and watch her laugh with the ridiculousness of teenagers who become adults overnight. The world outside kept its pace. Neighbors mowed lawns. The news cycled on about people whose dramas were never ours. It was infuriating and somehow merciful. The final shock came months later, when the baby arrived small and fierce and furious at the world. I sat in the hospital room, feeling like someone watching a miracle through a window. Claire was not there for most of the labor, she could not bear it. But she stood beside Mia when the first tiny wailing slipped into the air and the room turned into the kind of sacred space that is not religious but human. Mia looked at me, tired, raw, and luminous, with a new ownership in her gaze. "Dad," she whispered, voice threaded with wonder and terror. "He's beautiful." "He is," I said. "He is ours." It struck me then, in that small, tender room, that the future is not a ledger you can balance and seal. It is a thing you build with hands that may be blooded and clumsy. It is the hard work of choosing, to love, to protect, to be honest, even when honesty cuts. Months later, in the quiet of a house rearranged by absence and new presence, I found the planner again. My fingers traced the entry, the handwriting that once signaled secrecy. I tore out the page and tossed it in the recycling bin. It was a childish gesture and a ritual. The trash choked on the paper and closed around it. I did not forgive Claire in a way that washed the past away. Forgiveness is not always a clean vessel. Sometimes it is a slow, begrudging accommodation. We lived with the skeleton of what had been, and yet in odd, surprising moments, Mia's laugh with her child in the yard, Claire's small, apologetic smiles when she did something kind without being asked, some of the raw edges smoothed. The twist wasn't cinematic revenge or a courtroom climax. The twist was quieter and harder. Betrayal had not simply been an explosion, it had been a reconfiguration of love. It demanded new terms. It required work I had not consented to but which I, in the end, did because my daughter's small heart was at stake. In the end I learned something I'd known as a man whose life was measured in columns. There are debts you can calculate and debts you cannot. Some debts you pay with money. Some you pay with presence, with the slow, exhausting act of staying. And sometimes, the most shocking thing isn't the deceit itself but the way you choose to live with the fallout. How you take a broken ledger and, against every instinct that tells you to burn it and leave, you add a new column, care. Mia named the baby after my father. It felt like both an accusation and a benediction. I held that small, perfect, furious being in my arms and felt both rage and tenderness fold into something that could only be called responsibility. The house did not mend overnight. It never would. But a small life had entered it, and the rooms began, slowly, stubbornly, to have purpose again. The last line in my father's old ledger, written in his careful hand years ago, read, "No man is whole alone." I had read it 1,000 times and never fully understood. Now I did. We were not whole. Not by a long shot. But perhaps, if we could be honest, if we could work, if we could do the small, brutal things that constituted living, we might be able to build a new arithmetic of family from the shards. And that, I thought as the baby slept in the crook of my arm, was something like a miracle.